The first sound was a gasp, then a muffled sob echoing in the stillness of night. Maurice Bennett sat up straight in his creaky security office chair, startled by the sudden noise on the other end of the line. He hadn't expected anyone to call at this hour, not to this number. His night shift at Edison High School in Dayton, Ohio, was typically uneventful, filled with vending machine buzz, camera feeds, and the low hum of fluorescent lights. "Hello?" he said, voice calm, measured. There was no answer, just breathing, uneven and fragile. He waited. A long silence. Then came a whisper. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to call." Maurice paused. "You sure? Sounds like maybe you needed to." On the 54th floor of a penthouse in downtown Chicago, Samantha Langley sat curled on her living room rug, knees to her chest, still gripping her phone. Her wine glass had tipped over. The stain was spreading across the edge of a $4,000 rug she no longer cared about. All she could feel was the weight pressing on her chest, crushing, drowning. "I thought I was calling a helpline," she managed. "Well," Maurice said gently, "you didn't get a professional, but you got someone who can listen." She almost hung up. Instead, her shoulders dropped. "You don't know me." "Nope. And you don't know me either. Kinda perfect, isn't it?" She let out a shaky breath. "I'm Sam." "I'm Maurice. Hi, Sam." End. That moment, two strangers on opposite ends of a call never meant to happen held more truth than most of her boardroom meetings over the past decade. She didn't say much that first night, and he didn't push. She talked in circles, fragmented sentences, about betrayal, about losing control of something she built. She didn't say company or millions or board vote. She only said things like, "They're turning on me," and "I can't breathe when I walk into that building anymore." Maurice didn't offer advice, he offered space. "Sometimes silence is the only thing big enough to hold our pain," he said. "Do you always talk like that?" she asked, a trace of curiosity in her exhaustion. "I used to teach English. Baldwin, Angelou, Langston Hughes. Now I talk to cameras and mop floors." For the first time that night, she gave a broken laugh. "That's an upgrade in humanity, probably." He smiled, though she couldn't see it. "You'd be surprised." The call lasted 7 minutes. She didn't realize until after she hung up that she hadn't cried alone. The next night, the wine stayed corked. She sat on the same rug, holding her phone. A pause, a breath. Then she dialed the same number. "Hello again," Maurice said, like he'd been waiting. From then on, it became a rhythm, a ritual. No names beyond first names, no job titles, no explanations. Just conversations between two people from very different worlds who found something familiar in each other's voices. Maurice told stories of being a teacher, how his wife, Nadine, used to read him poems every Sunday morning before church, how losing her felt like someone ripped the middle page out of my life, and I've been reading around the hole ever since. Samantha listened. Sometimes she cried, sometimes she talked, sometimes they sat in silence, letting the sounds of rain or vending machine clicks fill the space. He never asked what she did. She never volunteered, but he heard it in the way she spoke, in the way she hesitated before every word, like someone who spent years choosing the most strategic version of the truth. "You don't sleep much, do you?" he asked once. "No," she replied, "not for years." "Me neither. Grief and guilt make terrible lullabies." The connection between them wasn't romantic, at least not yet. It was human, unvarnished, unreasonable, unexplained. She began walking more, without makeup, without headlines. She stopped watching cable news. She started reading poetry again. He had suggested Neruda. She ordered every book. One night, she mailed him her favorite edition. No return address, just a post-it, for the nights that need gentler words. He received it during his break. He didn't need a name to know who sent it. He smiled, set it beside his thermos, and returned to watching the hall monitors his shift, now colored by a thread of warmth. Meanwhile, in Chicago, the storm outside mirrored the one inside Samantha's company. Richard, the ex-boyfriend, and now acting VP, had begun planting stories. A whisper campaign, questioning her judgment, her mental state, her fitness to lead. She'd built this empire, and now, like termites in the walls, her world was crumbling from within. Still, she didn't tell Maurice. But one night, her voice cracked. "You ever feel like you're being erased, while still standing in the room. Maurice took a long pause, then said, "Truth doesn't always shout. Sometimes it just outlasts the lie." That night, Samantha whispered, "I need to leave this city." "Running?" he asked. "Number. For the first time in years, I think I want to breathe." She didn't know what she meant exactly. She only knew that something about that voice, on the other end of a wrong number, felt more honest than anything in her high-rise tower. And in that moment, surrounded by cold glass, glowing skyline, and half-packed boxes, Samantha Langley decided she wasn't running away, she was heading towards something. Or maybe someone. She didn't leave right away. In fact, Samantha stayed in Chicago longer than she thought she could bear, trapped between board meetings, legal documents, and lingering silences in the penthouse that once felt like a symbol of power. But now, it felt hollow, like standing in a museum built for someone she no longer was. The only place she felt seen, ironically, was in a series of late-night phone calls with a man she had never met. And every night at 1:03 a.m. she called. Always the same number, always the same voice. "Hey Sam," he'd say, like he'd been expecting her. "Rough day?" She'd exhale, sometimes with a bitter laugh, sometimes just in silence, and then she'd speak. And somehow, in the stillness of Maurice's voice, she found room to breathe. They never broke the unspoken rule. No last names, no professions, no questions that poked too deeply. But they also never lied. There was something sacred in the ambiguity, and yet, their conversations dug deeper than any she had shared with people who knew her resume by heart. She told him about the piano she never played anymore, about the dog she had lost as a girl and never quite stopped mourning, about the way the city sounded different after midnight, less arrogant, more honest. Maurice told her about his garden, the stubborn tomatoes that refused to ripen this year, about the janitor down the hall who hummed Elvis when waxing the floors. He told her about Nadine, not in a tragic way, but like she was still living in every quiet decision he made. She hated the color green, he once said. "But I plant spinach every spring, keeps her spirit annoyed, makes me smile." Sam laughed that night, not the exhausted laugh from before, but something warmer, something that felt like sunlight through a curtain. One evening, she admitted, "I used to be someone who cried in boardrooms." Maurice didn't flinch. "You say that like it's a weakness." "Isn't it? Crying means you still care. The day you stop, that's when you should worry." She paused, feeling that truth hit deeper than expected. "They're trying to push me out. The man I trusted the most, he's leading it." "Then he never deserved your trust." "I gave him 5 years," she whispered. "My life, my heart. Time given is not time wasted, Sam. It's just time taught." It was lines like that casual wisdom laced with rhythm that made her forget the titles, the lawsuits, the whispers. He never tried to save her. He just gave her room to stop pretending she didn't need saving. One night, she called later than usual. Her voice was thin. "They offered me a payout." Maurice didn't interrupt. She went on. "It's hush money. Walk away quietly, keep my stock, disappear with dignity. And I think I'm going to take it." He didn't rush her. Finally, he said, "Then I hope you spend every penny on something that sets you free. You're not going to tell me to fight?" "No, ma'am. You've been fighting for years. Maybe it's time to live." That night, after the call, she poured herself a glass of water instead of wine. She walked barefoot through the apartment, paused at the bookshelf, and began packing. Not in the panic of escape, but with the calm of release. 2 days later, she sold the penthouse, quietly, privately, no press release, no social media farewell. She left a note on the grand piano for the new owners. "Play it often. It hates being alone." Her assistant didn't understand. Her lawyer raised an eyebrow. The board tried to call. She didn't answer. Instead, she drove. Not flew, not chauffeured. She packed her own bags, got into a modest rental car, and headed east. Somewhere along the highways of Indiana, she called again. "I'm on the road," she said. Maurice didn't ask where to. He simply said, "Safe travels, and keep your eyes open." Sometimes life hides its best views behind cracked fences. That night, in a roadside motel, she stared at the popcorn ceiling and realized she hadn't thought about Richard in over 6 hours. It felt like a small victory. She kept driving. The next day, she crossed into Ohio. The cornfields stretched forever. The sky opened up. and something in her chest, something she'd carried for years, finally exhaled. In a diner off Route 40, she ordered blueberry pie and asked the waitress where Edison High School was. The woman smiled. "Best security guard in the county works there, Maurice. Man's got poetry in his bones." Samantha just nodded, biting back a smile. That night, she didn't call. Instead, she walked to the gates of Edison High. It was nearly midnight. The building stood quiet, the air thick with summer, and there he was, sitting behind the reception desk, nose buried in a battered paperback, steam rising from a styrofoam cup. She stood outside the glass doors for a long moment, unsure what to do, unsure what to say. Then she knocked softly, like a whisper on wood. Maurice looked up, startled. Then he stood. For a second, he didn't recognize her, and then he smiled. Not surprised, just ready. She opened the door and stepped inside. "Hi," she said. "I'm Sam." Maurice nodded. "I know. No more wrong numbers, no more distance. Just two people in the same quiet place, no longer needing to pretend. If this story touched your heart, please like the video to help spread the message of quiet justice and human kindness. Don't forget to subscribe and leave a comment. What do you think about Samantha's journey? Do you believe a wrong number can truly change a life? The clock on the wall blinked 12:07 a.m., but the moment between them stretched longer than time knew how to measure. Maurice stood in the quiet of Edison High's front lobby, face softened by the glow of the vending machines behind him. Samantha, still in jeans and a faded green sweater from her drive, held her breath. For a man she'd never seen in person, Maurice looked exactly how she'd imagined him. Creased eyes that had seen both joy and sorrow, shoulders that carried more than physical weight, and hands that looked like they had built things and let things go. He didn't say anything grand. He simply tilted his head toward the hallway and said, "You want pie?" She blinked. "Now?" He nodded, already walking. "There's a diner, a block from here, open all night. I go there when the ghosts in this place get too chatty." She followed. The night was warm, the Ohio air thick with the hum of cicadas and the low rustle of leaves. They walked in silence, not awkwardly, but with the kind of comfort that comes from having already spoken without pretense. The diner was lit like a memory, neon signs buzzing, red vinyl booths shiny under fluorescent lights, the smell of grease and sugar stitched into the walls. The waitress greeted Maurice with a tired grin. "Back again?" "Brought company this time," he said, nodding toward Sam. They took the booth by the window. She ordered blueberry pie again. He ordered coffee, black. For a while, they didn't talk. It wasn't necessary. Their silence was thick with all the calls they'd shared. Then, gently, Maurice said, "You didn't come here just for pie." Sam stared at her plate. "Number, you come to see if the voice matched the face?" "No," she said. "I came to see if the voice felt the same in real life. It does." He leaned back, eyes searching hers. "You left Chicago." "I did. Permanently?" "I think so." He nodded slowly. "You know what that makes you?" She raised an eyebrow. "Brave." She shook her head. "I'm tired, not brave. Mine. They look the same from a distance," he said, sipping his coffee. She smiled, but her eyes stayed heavy. "I'm not sure what I'm supposed to do now. Maybe don't do anything yet. Maybe just be." "But I've never just been. I've always been chasing, building, proving. Then maybe now's the time to learn another rhythm." She sat back, the idea foreign but not unappealing. "You really did teach English, didn't you?" He grinned. "A long time ago, before the school budget got slashed and they decided poetry didn't pay the bills. And now you're a security guard. And now I'm a quiet man with a lot of stories, most of which are too long for diner booths." She looked out the window. "Maybe that's what I need. A few stories, a few slow nights. You're welcome to them." Back at the school, Maurice let her walk through the halls with him. The floors gleamed under the dim lights, locker doors slightly ajar like sleepy mouths, echoes of distant high school dramas lingering in the air. He pointed out the janitor's closet, where he wrote bad haikus during lunch breaks, the teacher's lounge where he once fell asleep during a tornado drill, and the art room where Nadine's photo still hung in the corner, a younger Maurice beside her, both of them smiling like the future couldn't touch them. Sam lingered by the photo. She was beautiful. End of sec. She was everything, Maurice said, and then she wasn't. Cancer doesn't care how many books you've read. Sam looked at him, the weight in her chest resonating with his. "I'm sorry." He shrugged. "I got 27 years. Some folks don't get half that. I'm grateful." They sat for a while in the teacher's lounge, feet propped up, silence filling the cracks. Sam spoke first. "You think it's too late to start over?" "Never." "You say that like it's easy." "Oh." "No," he replied. "I say it like someone who had to. When Nadine passed, I stopped writing. I stopped teaching. I stopped believing in things. Then one day, I was cleaning out a classroom and found a note she wrote in a book she'd given me. It said, 'You're still here. So live like it.' I figured if I was still here, I might as well make it mean something." Sam closed her eyes, the weight of his words settling in her ribs. "I'm still here too," she said. "Then maybe it's time to ask what you want that to mean." They didn't solve anything that night. There were no revelations, no grand decisions. Just two people sharing oxygen and silence, and the fragile beginning of something real. As she left, he walked her to the door. "Where are you staying?" he asked. "I haven't figured that out yet." He reached into his pocket, pulled out a small brass key. "There's a guest trailer behind my place. It's dusty, but clean. Nadine used to keep it for her sister when she visited. You're welcome to it." She hesitated. "That's a big offer. You've already let me into your midnight thoughts. I figure it's fair." She took the key. As she walked toward her car, Maurice called out softly, "Hey, Sam." She turned. "I'm glad you called the wrong number." She smiled. "Me too. The cicadas sang louder as she drove off into the night, a brass key in her pocket, and something new unfolding in the silence between two kindred souls who had found each other by accident, or maybe not. Maybe life had finally picked up the right line. The trailer sat quietly behind Maurice's modest house, half hidden by an old willow tree whose branches swept the earth like fingers brushing forgotten stories. Samantha stepped inside, key still warm in her hand. The air held a faint scent of lavender and old books, and everything inside was perfectly still, as if it had been waiting for her. The walls were pale green, the kind of color that didn't ask for attention, and a hand-stitched quilt lay folded at the foot of the bed. On the small wooden table was a framed photo of Maurice and Nadine, laughing on what looked like a picnic blanket. Time had weathered the edges of the frame, but the joy in their faces was untouched. Sam didn't unpack much. Just a duffel bag, a notebook, and a worn copy of Neruda's poems that Maurice once told her to read out loud when silence got too loud. She sat on the bed and stared at her reflection in the dusty mirror. The woman looking back wasn't the CEO of a multi-million-dollar tech company. She wasn't the face on Forbes or the keynote speaker in 4-inch heels. She was just Sam now. No walls, no scripts, no power games. And for the first time in years, that didn't terrify her. It comforted her. The next morning, sunlight spilled through the window, warm and unapologetic. She made herself a cup of coffee with the ancient percolator on the counter and stepped outside barefoot. Maurice was tending to his tomato plants. "You're up early," he called over, wiping his hands on a faded towel. "The birds wouldn't shut up," she replied. He grinned. "Welcome to rural Ohio. Nature doesn't care about your sleep schedule." She walked over and watched as he trimmed leaves with precision. "You really care about these plants," she said. "They don't talk back," he said, "and they remind me that growth takes time." They worked side by side in silence for a while. She watered. He pruned. Occasionally, they exchanged small words, nothing profound, just the kind of casual exchanges that stitch new familiarity. Later, they shared breakfast on his porch, eggs, toast, and thick slices of cantaloupe. No pressed juices, no phone buzzes, no emails with subject lines in all caps. Just food and sky and space to be human. Afterward, Sam offered to help him on his rounds at the school. "You sure?" Maurice asked. "I've never seen a CEO volunteer to check boiler rooms." "I'm not a CEO anymore," she replied. "And I've never seen a boiler room, so it's a win-win." At Edison High, she followed him through hallways lined with faded posters and the faint scent of floor wax. He greeted everyone they passed, students, janitors, a math teacher with coffee stains on her shirt. They all knew him. And more than that, they respected him, not because of status, because of consistency, because of presence. In the teacher's lounge, he introduced her as Sam, without further explanation. No one asked who she really was. No one cared. That anonymity felt like a second skin, unfamiliar but oddly comforting. In the afternoon, Maurice paused outside the art room. Through the glass, a group of kids were painting murals, vivid, messy, wild. One of them, a girl with bright pink hair, caught sight of Maurice and waved like she was seeing her favorite uncle. "That's Zoe," he said. "Used to get suspended every semester. Now she runs the art club." Sam watched Zoe with curiosity. What changed? Someone stopped punishing her for being different and started asking her what she needed. He glanced at Sam. Sometimes all it takes is one person who listens differently. The words settled deep. All those years at the top, Sam had thought leadership meant control, precision, strategy. But watching Maurice, she realized that real leadership looked more like stillness, like patience, like showing up even when no one clapped. That night, they returned to the diner. Not out of habit, but out of comfort. Sam ordered the pie again. Maurice, the same coffee. "You ever think about going back?" he asked, stirring cream into his cup. "To the company? To the world you left behind?" She hesitated. "Sometimes. Then I remember how tired I felt, not just in my body, but in my soul." "That kind of tired doesn't go away with sleep," he said. But it fades when you stop pretending you're fine." She looked out the window, the neon signs casting soft reflections on the glass. "I think I want to build something new," she said. "Not like before. Smaller, real. Maybe something for women who lost their way like I did." Maurice nodded slowly. "You don't need a boardroom to make a difference." She smiled. "You sound like a Hallmark card. Years of poetry will do that to a man." They laughed, and in that sound there was a soft healing. After they finished eating, they walked back slowly under the stars. Ohio nights were generous, sky stretched wide open, constellations visible like old friends. "You think people can change?" she asked. "I think people remember who they were before they were told who to be." Sam thought about that for a long time. The trailer felt warmer when she returned that night. She didn't sleep immediately. She opened her notebook and began to write not emails or strategies, but memories. Thoughts, questions, seeds of something that hadn't yet grown roots but was already alive. She ended the entry with a line. "I called the wrong number, and the universe answered." As she lay in bed, listening to the willow branches scratch the windows, she knew something had shifted. Not everything was healed, not everything was certain, but something was beginning. And for now, that was enough. It rained the next morning, the kind of slow, steady rain that felt more like a rhythm than a disruption. Samantha sat on the trailer's small front steps, a mug of coffee warming her palms as she watched the droplets slide off the leaves. She wasn't used to this kind of quiet, the kind that didn't demand answers or outcomes. Maurice had already gone to the school, leaving her a note scribbled on a torn envelope. "Boiler's acting up again. Don't burn the toast. M." She smiled at the crooked handwriting. There was something deeply human about it. Around mid-morning, she took a walk through the town. It was small but not sleepy, alive in subtle ways. A dog barked from a hardware store, a boy skateboarded past with a grin full of braces, and an older woman swept her porch while humming a hymn. No one stared at Sam. No one knew her as the woman from the news. They just nodded politely, offered a smile, and went on living. It felt like stepping into a life that wasn't borrowed or borrowed against. She wandered into a small used bookstore tucked between a barbershop and an insurance agency. The bell above the door chimed, and a man with thick glasses looked up from behind a counter piled with paperbacks. "You looking for anything special?" he asked. "Something without a business plan," she said. He chuckled and waved her toward the poetry shelf. She ran her fingers along the spines, pausing at a worn copy of Adrian Rich's The Dream of a Common Language. She opened it and found a small handwritten note tucked between the pages. "Don't forget, you are allowed to begin again. No signature, just the words." She bought the book and carried it like a secret. That afternoon, back at the trailer, Maurice found her sitting on the steps again, reading. "Good choice," he said, nodding to the cover. "That book saved me once. I think it's trying to save me now," she replied. He sat beside her, their knees almost touching. "You ever think the universe plants the same words in different lives just when we need them? Lately, I'm starting to believe that." He reached into his bag and pulled out a brown envelope. "Something came for you. Looks like your old world trying to sneak through." She took it cautiously. No return address. Inside, a single piece of paper, a printed article from a business gossip site. The headline read, "Ex-CEO Samantha Greer spotted in Ohio town is a comeback in the works." Her jaw clenched slightly. Below the headline was a blurry photo of her at the diner. She remembered the night. She hadn't even noticed anyone watching. "They found me," she said quietly. Maurice didn't respond right away. He just let her sit with it. "You okay?" he asked. "I don't know. You can disappear, Sam, but your impact won't." She folded the paper and looked at him. "I didn't want to disappear. I just wanted to breathe." "Then maybe it's time to decide how to exist on your own terms." That night, she cooked dinner at Maurice's house for the first time. Grilled chicken, roasted sweet potatoes, and a salad too big for the two of them. They ate at the kitchen table, under a flickering light bulb that buzzed every few seconds. It wasn't glamorous, but it felt more real than any dinner she'd had at a hotel, rooftop, or charity gala. After dinner, they sat in his living room, a record spinning soft jazz in the background. Sam leaned back on the couch, her legs curled beneath her. "Do you miss her every day?" she asked. Maurice didn't need to ask who. Not in the same way. It changes. Some days it's just a shadow. Other days, it's a storm, but always there. She nodded, understanding more than she thought she would. "I think I'm grieving too," she said. "Not just a man or a job, but an entire version of myself. One I built to survive, but not to live. That's a heavy grief, but it clears space for something new." She closed her eyes and let the music fill the quiet between them. It wasn't romance, not yet. It was something deeper. A gentle weaving of lives, the stitching of trust over shared moments. And yet, as she listened to the rain returning outside, she felt the faintest pull in her chest, a possibility, unspoken but undeniable. The next morning, she woke before the sun. The sky was still a canvas of deep blue, and the world hadn't fully stirred. She made coffee, poured 2 cups, and walked barefoot through the grass to Maurice's porch. He was already there, wrapped in an old quilt, watching the horizon. "I figured you'd be up," she said, handing him the mug. He took it with a smile. Some sunrises are worth catching. They watched in silence as the sky softened and the first sliver of gold split the darkness. As the light grew, so did something in her, a steadiness she hadn't felt in years. "I've been thinking," she said. "I want to start something. Here, something that matters." Maurice turned to her, eyes curious. "What kind of something?" "A space for women like me. Women who burned out, got pushed out, or just lost their way. A retreat, a second chapter kind of place." He nodded, the idea settling easily between them. "You'll need help." "That's why I'm telling you," she said. "I want you in it. Not just because I trust you, but because I need someone who knows how to keep things grounded." He smiled slowly. "Well, I do know how to fix boilers. And gardens. And people," she added. They sat there a while longer, letting the day begin around them, letting the dream take its first breath. It wasn't a comeback. It wasn't revenge. It was reclamation. And Samantha was ready. 3 weeks passed like a slow song humming through a quiet summer. The retreat idea had taken root not just in Samantha's mind, but in the soil of the town itself. She had begun drafting plans late into the night, curled up with her notebook under the soft hum of the ceiling fan in the trailer. The idea wasn't polished or perfect yet, but it was breathing, growing, changing shape each day like something alive. Maurice had shown her a piece of property just outside town, a wide, sun-drenched clearing surrounded by pine trees and whispering wind. The land used to be an old summer camp, long since abandoned. The cabins had crumbled, the canoes were rotting into the lake, and the sign that once read Camp Wildflower now hung crooked, one chain missing. But where others might see decay, Samantha saw potential. "It's like the world forgot this place," she said, walking through the overgrown grass. "Maybe it was waiting for you to remember it," Maurice replied. They began spending their mornings there, him with work gloves, clearing paths and chopping fallen branches, her with a clipboard, sketching rough designs for shared cabins, art studios, spaces for therapy, meditation, and connection. Each day, they peeled back another layer of the past to make room for the future. And yet, the past never stayed quiet for long. One Thursday afternoon, as they returned from the site covered in dirt and sun, they found an SUV parked near Maurice's house. A woman stepped out, tall, severe, impeccably dressed. Samantha recognized her instantly, Ellen Brooks, her former company's legal counsel. Sharp as a blade. "Sam," Ellen called, striding toward her with clipped steps. "You've been very hard to reach." Samantha set down her bag calmly, though her heartbeat stumbled. That was intentional. Ellen glanced at Maurice, noting the dirt under his nails, the easy way he stood beside Sam. "I see you've found new company. Why are you here, Ellen?" "Because you left chaos behind, and some of us are still cleaning it up." Sam crossed her arms. "I warned them, months before I left." "They weren't prepared for your absence," Ellen said coldly. "Investors are jittery. Employees are divided. And now, rumors are flying that you're planning some emotional recovery spa in the woods." "It's not a spa," Samantha said evenly. "It's a space, a community, something real." "Real doesn't pay salaries. Neither does burnout in silence," Sam snapped. "I built that company from scratch. I gave it everything. And when I said I needed time, they laughed. Now I'm doing something that matters. You didn't come here to check on me. You came to make me feel small." Maurice stepped forward then, calm but firm. "I think it's time you left, ma'am." Ellen looked at him as though seeing him for the first time. "And who exactly are you?" "The man who answers the phone when she cries at 2 a.m. The one who listens." Ellen's mouth tightened. "You were always too idealistic, Sam. Don't forget, idealism never saved a sinking ship." "No," Sam replied, "but it builds lifeboats." Ellen turned, heels crunching gravel, and drove off without another word. The silence she left behind was heavy. Maurice watched her go, then turned to Sam. "You okay?" "Not really," she whispered, "but I will be." That night, she sat on the porch of the trailer, Maurice beside her. They didn't talk much, just watched the stars, letting the quiet mend what the day had bruised. Finally, she said, "I used to think power meant being untouchable. Now I think it means being seen and standing anyway." "Then you're more powerful now than you've ever been," Maurice replied. She looked at him, his eyes steady, honest. "Thank you for standing with me." He simply nodded, because some truths don't need dressing. Over the next few days, something in Sam changed. Her steps were more certain, her voice more rooted. She met with local builders about refurbishing the cabins. She visited nearby towns to speak with counselors, artisans, and retired therapists willing to offer time or wisdom. Word spread slowly but steadily. Some people didn't understand it, others did. One afternoon, an older woman named Joy knocked on the trailer door. She had silver hair, a cane, and a stack of journals in her arms. "I heard you're starting a place for women like us," she said. "I've got stories, pain, hope, and a pair of strong hands if you need them." Samantha welcomed her in, made tea, and listened. One by one, others came. A single mother who taught ceramics, a retired social worker, a nurse who had survived a toxic divorce and still bore the weight in her eyes. Each had something to give, each had something to heal. One evening, as Samantha watched a few of them clear brush at the campsite, she felt her throat tighten, not with fear, but with awe. She had planted an idea, and now it was blooming beyond her. Later that night, she wrote in her journal, "I used to chase recognition. Now I chase connection." Before bed, she stepped outside to breathe in the cool air. Maurice stood by the garden, adjusting the netting on his tomatoes. She walked over and placed a hand lightly on his shoulder. He turned, smiling. "I think it's working," she said. "I think you're building something beautiful," he replied. She looked up at the moon, full and gentle. "You know what scares me?" "What?" "That I might fall in love with all of this, and then lose it again." Maurice took her hand not forcefully, just enough to steady. Loving something is always a risk, but it's the only thing that ever mattered. In that moment, there was no title, no scandal, no fear. Just two people under the stars, standing in the middle of a story that was still being written. And Samantha, once so broken by the noise of ambition, now felt held by the quiet strength of purpose. By the time the first cold breeze of early autumn rolled into town, the retreat had a name: Second Light. Maurice came up with it one morning as they were sanding an old door they found in the collapsed cabin that was being converted into the main gathering space. "People always talk about the light at the end of the tunnel," he said, wiping sawdust from his arms. "But they forget the second light, the one that comes after the tunnel, when you start building again." Samantha didn't say anything at first, just pressed her fingers to the word as he wrote it down. Second light. It felt right, like breath after holding too long, like waking up and not needing to reach for your armor. That week, they painted the name across a reclaimed wood sign, hung it between two trees at the path leading into the property. A few locals gathered as they raised it, nothing fancy, no ribbon cutting or press, just a small group of people who had chosen to say yes to something healing. Among them was Joy, who had taken to calling Samantha boss lady with a wink, and Carla, the single mother, who had transformed an old shed into a pottery nook and taught classes every Thursday. Samantha stood quietly at the back, watching the sign sway in the breeze, a small ache curling in her chest. It wasn't sadness, it was something gentler, a recognition that she was no longer who she had been. And yet, as the sign swayed, she noticed a dark car parked at the far edge of the road, just beyond the trees. Windows tinted, engine still, watching, her breath hitched. Maurice noticed. "You know that car?" "No," she said slowly, "but I know the feeling it brings." That evening, they drove into town for groceries. The aisles were familiar now. She knew the cashier's name, Marla, knew which yogurt Maurice liked, peach, and how he always snuck a bag of cinnamon candies into the cart when he thought she wasn't looking. As they walked out into the parking lot, Samantha froze. The car, same make, same license plate. "It's him," she whispered. Maurice didn't ask who. He looked at her face, her posture. He knew. "Do you want to leave?" "No," she said after a moment. "I want to see what he wants." They stood by her car, and eventually the man stepped out of the black vehicle. Richard, her former CFO. The man who once held her trust like a loaded gun and pulled the trigger with a boardroom vote. He approached, suit crisp, smile carefully shaped. "Samantha," he said smoothly, "you look rustic." She didn't respond to the jab. "Why are you here?" "I heard you were putting together some kind of refuge for the lost and broken." "We prefer resilient and rebuilding." "Always the wordsmith," he chuckled. "I'm here because we have unfinished business." "We don't," she said firmly. "You made your decision. I made mine." "The board is flailing," he said. "They want you back, maybe not as CEO, but as a consultant, a name to stabilize the image." "A name, not a person," she said. "Exactly. You want me to lend my credibility to the system that cut me out? Business is business, Sam. And what I'm doing now, is it not business? This?" He gestured vaguely toward the grocery store. "It's cute. It's therapeutic, but it won't last." Samantha took a step closer, eyes steady. "You know what doesn't last, Richard? Fear, shame, silence. That's what I left behind. And you're still wearing it like a tailored suit." He hesitated, the smile faltering. "You were better when you were with us." "No," she said. "I was quieter. That's not the same." He opened his mouth, then closed it, realizing perhaps for the first time that she wouldn't be returning not to the company, not to the version of herself he could control. "Goodbye, Richard." He left without another word. Maurice waited until the car disappeared down the road before speaking. "You handled that like a woman who knows who she is." She exhaled, long and low. "I didn't feel that way. That's because you're still shaking the dust off the mirror. But you're already shining." That night, Maurice made chili, too spicy and too hearty, and they ate by lantern light in the unfinished gathering space at Second Light. Joy played harmonica in the corner, Carla brought cornbread, and someone hung fairy lights between the rafters. The roof still leaked in one corner, but no one seemed to mind. Samantha looked around the room at the faces lit with laughter and comfort, and thought about all the boardroom tables she had sat at, how cold the smiles were, how sharp the laughter had been. This room, though? This was warmth. This was truth. And yet, even in joy, the memory of Richard's visit lingered. She knew he wasn't done. People like him rarely walked away without one final swing, and it would come not today, but soon. For now, though, she had people to protect, a dream to finish, and a love story beginning to bloom in the quiet corners of her life. After the others left, she and Maurice lingered, cleaning up, stacking bowls. "I keep waiting for it to all fall apart," she admitted. "That's the trauma talking," he said. "It whispers that peace isn't safe. But what if it's right? What if this is too fragile?" He looked at her, the dim light catching the silver at his temples. "Then we hold it gently, not because it's weak, but because it matters." She leaned into him, forehead to his shoulder. "I've never done this without fear." Maybe that's what courage looks like, walking anyway. The wind outside had picked up, leaves swirling like secrets. But inside, beneath the beams of a rebuilt cabin, and under the gaze of stars that had seen centuries of storms, Samantha Greer decided she would not run. Not again. Whatever came next, she would meet it with both hands open and her heart on her sleeve, stitched not with pride but with grace. Because this wasn't a comeback. This was a claiming, a name, a purpose, a second light. The first frost arrived quietly, cloaking the morning grass in a veil of silver. Samantha stood at the edge of the property with a steaming mug in her hands, watching the mist roll through the trees like breath from an old story, trying to remember its ending. The air bit at her cheeks, but she stayed rooted, eyes on the crooked sign that still swayed gently in the wind, second light. It had begun as an idea, then a project, and now it pulsed like a heartbeat, gathering people from corners she never knew existed. Women came with bruises beneath sweaters and smiles too tight to last, carrying silence like a second skin. They arrived through whispers and word of mouth, drawn not by advertising but by the gentle promise of safety, and Samantha welcomed them all not with speeches, but with presence. That morning, as the sun began to stretch over the treetops, Carla came walking up the path, her toddler bouncing in her arms and a brown envelope tucked under one arm. She looked uneasy. "Boss lady," she called softly. Samantha turned. "You're up early." Carla nodded, shifting the boy to her hip. "This came yesterday. Postmarked Chicago. No return address." She handed over the envelope, eyes flicking with concern. Samantha's heart skipped. The name on the front was printed in crisp block letters, Samantha E. Greer. The weight of it in her hands felt like stone. She waited until she was alone in her trailer to open it. The letter inside was handwritten, each line tight and calculated. "Sam, I imagine you're surprised to hear from me. Then again, maybe you're not. People like you don't forget. They just wait for the right moment. You were always the one who saw beneath things, even when it hurt. Maybe that's why the board feared you. Maybe that's why I didn't stop them. But here's what I've come to understand. Power doesn't corrupt. It reveals. And what I saw revealed in me wasn't pretty. I followed fear. I masked it with numbers and logic, but I betrayed something sacred the day I voted against you. There's a reckoning coming, Sam. Investors are pulling out. Your name still holds weight, and it's not too late to return, not to lead, but to anchor. But I don't think you will, and I don't blame you. If you ever want to talk, really talk, I'll be at the Willows Inn off Route 19 every Thursday at 5 for the next month. After that, who knows? R. She read the letter twice, then folded it neatly and placed it in the drawer beside her bed. She didn't burn it. She didn't cry. She simply stared out the window, her mind a quiet river of maybe and once. That afternoon, Maurice found her in the garden, pruning dead stems from the late-blooming lavender. "You okay?" he asked. She looked up, hands still in the soil. "I got a letter." "From him?" "Yes." "What does he want? Redemption or an audience? Maybe both." Maurice didn't push. He just sat beside her, hands resting on his knees. After a while, she said, "There's something strange about it." He admitted fault, in writing. Maurice smiled slightly. Maybe he finally saw the cost. Of what? Of confusing silence with strength. That night, Samantha didn't go to the Willows Inn, but she marked Thursday on her calendar with a simple dot. No labels, no commitments, just a quiet possibility. The retreat continued to bloom in small, miraculous ways. A local librarian offered to host writing workshops. A trauma nurse who had retired early due to burnout began leading guided meditations. The community board approved their zoning status as a nonprofit sanctuary, and donations started arriving in small envelopes with handwritten notes like, "Thank you for existing," or "This place gave my sister back to herself." Every note was pinned to the corkboard in the gathering room, beneath the painted words, "You belong here." Still, not everything was peace. There were sleepless nights. There were sudden tears from women who had gone months without crying. There was one woman, Anna, who arrived in silence and left in the middle of the night, leaving behind only a crocheted scarf and a note that read, "I wanted to stay. I just don't know how yet." Samantha kept the scarf, folded it gently, prayed, in her own way, for Anna's return. And then, On the second Thursday, Samantha stood at the edge of her trailer porch, coat wrapped tight, staring at the clock. 4:45. Maurice appeared beside her, coffee in hand. "You're going," he said, not as a question, but as a statement of fact. She didn't answer, just walked to the truck. The Willows Inn was a quiet place with a fireplace and too many lace doilies. She arrived at 5:03. Richard was already seated, staring into a glass of something brown and expensive. He looked older, or maybe more human. "Sam," he said as she approached. She didn't sit. "You have 10 minutes. He nodded. "I'm not here to win you back. I know better. I just needed to say it to your face. I was wrong. Not just in business, in how I saw you. I thought your fire was volatility. But it was vision. Vision doesn't pay when the board's scared." "No," he admitted. "But it leads when everyone else is blind." For a long moment she said nothing. The fire crackled. The clock ticked, and then she said, "You wrote that power reveals. What did it reveal in me?" He looked up. "Mercy, even when you shouldn't have had any left." She walked out 5 minutes later. Didn't turn back, didn't crumble, didn't offer absolution, but she left a 20 on the table, enough to cover both drinks. That night, back at the retreat, she found a new note pinned to the board. It wasn't signed. Just a single sentence. "Thank you for teaching me that healing isn't weakness." She stood there a long time, hand resting on the words, heart full of something unnamed but strong. Behind her, Maurice's voice was soft. "You keep lighting fires, Sam, even for the ones who tried to put yours out." She smiled, tired but true. "That's what second light means, isn't it?" It does now. And somewhere, far beyond the retreat, past roads she no longer traveled, someone else whispered her name, not in anger or pity, but in memory of a woman who had once walked away not to escape, but to become. The call came just after dawn, crackling through the old landline that rarely rang unless it was something real. Samantha answered with half-laced boots and sleep still in her voice. "Sam, it's Carla. You need to get down to the East Ridge. The trees are glowing." Those 5 words yanked her fully awake. She was out the door in minutes, Maurice already ahead of her, flashlight slicing through the morning fog. By the time they reached the ridge, a low orange shimmer had begun curling through the tree line. The scent of smoke, faint but undeniable, hung in the air. It wasn't panic yet, but it was the breath right before it. "Is it a wildfire?" Carla asked, holding her toddler close, the boy's tiny fingers wrapped around her shirt like roots. Maurice crouched, testing the wind. "It's small now, could just be a stray campfire someone didn't bury. But if it spreads west with this breeze," his voice trailed off. Everyone knew what lay west. The cabins, the retreat, the archive of healing they'd built with their bare hands and broken hearts. Samantha turned toward the small group that had gathered half-dressed, worried, eyes wide. "We don't wait, we act." The retreat had no formal fire plan. It had never needed one. But what it did have was unity. In minutes, hoses were unwound, buckets filled, lines formed. Maurice and Joy led the front line up the ridge, following the smoke. Samantha stayed at the base, organizing rotations, assigning runners, checking cabins. And all the while, the smoke thickened. Not fast, not furious, but persistent, like a memory that refused to stay buried. By mid-morning, they had eyes on the source, a careless fire pit in the woods, left smoldering by hikers. It had chewed through low brush and reached the edge of the pine wall. Maurice and Joy dug a brake line while Carla coordinated supplies. Samantha joined them just as a gust of wind sent embers flying. For a breathless second, everything hung in tension. Then flames licked up a young pine. It caught like it had been waiting. "We need the douse lines," Maurice shouted, and Samantha didn't hesitate. She grabbed a hose and ran, feet pounding earth, memories of boardrooms and betrayal replaced with bark and breath and fire. They fought for hours. The flames hissed and spat, angry at the interruption. But second light didn't yield. It held. And slowly, so slowly, the fire weakened, died. By dusk, the smoke curled upward like a final sigh. The ridge was charred but standing. No cabins lost. No injuries. Only soot-covered hands and hearts beating like war drums. They gathered at the main lodge that night, wrapped in blankets, cheeks streaked with ash. Someone brewed coffee. Someone else played an old record on the turntable. It scratched and popped, but the melody landed soft. Samantha sat beside Maurice, staring into the flickering lanterns they'd set in place of electricity. "You ever think we bit off more than we can chew?" she asked quietly. He looked around the room, where Joy laughed hoarsely, and Carla's boy slept on her lap, soot still smudged across his forehead. "Every day," he said, "but then I see this and I remember. Some things are worth burning for." Her gaze dropped to her hands, raw, blistered, but steady. "When I started this place," she said, "I thought I was building a refuge from the world, but I think maybe I was building a fire line, a boundary, a shield." Maurice nodded. "And sometimes shields need flames to remind people they're still standing." There was a silence between them, rich and respectful. And then Samantha reached into her coat and pulled out the folded letter from Richard, the one she had never responded to. She held it over the lantern. Maurice didn't stop her. He watched as the edges curled and blackened, words vanishing into smoke. "No more ghosts," she whispered. "No more giving power to things I already survived." The room remained warm, the air clear, the people safe. Later that night, Samantha stood again at the ridge. The trees still smoldered in places, thin wisps rising like prayers. She closed her eyes and breathed it in, not the fear, but the resilience. And that's when she felt it, a hand on her shoulder. She turned. It was Anna, the one who had left weeks ago in the night, without goodbye. Her eyes were tired but steady. "I came back," Anna said simply. "I don't know if I'm ready, but I'm here." Samantha didn't speak. She just opened her arms, and Anna stepped into them like someone who had been walking for years toward this one moment. The fire hadn't taken anything that mattered. In fact, it had returned something. The next morning, Samantha gathered everyone in the clearing. "We need to build," she said, "not just to replace what the fire touched, but to prepare. The world will always bring flame. We can't stop that, but we can learn to carry water together." No one clapped, no one cheered, but heads nodded, shoulders straightened. And somewhere in that quiet readiness, Samantha felt it a turning. Not of the world outside, but of the world within. This wasn't the end of a battle. It was the beginning of a stand. Second Light wasn't a retreat anymore. It was a front line for those who had none. A place where people came not just to heal, but to hold. And that, she realized, was the truest fire of all. Not the one that burns to destroy, but the one that stays lit long after the smoke clears so others might find their way home. There was a stillness in the air after the fire, the kind that comes not from peace but from anticipation. Second Light had survived, but something deeper had been stirred. Samantha felt it in her bones each morning when she laced her boots, in the long pauses during conversations, in the way Maurice seemed to watch the horizon like he was waiting for something or someone to return. 2 days after the ridge fire, a white SUV pulled up the gravel path just after noon. It wasn't unusual for visitors to arrive unannounced, seeking shelter or simply curious about the stories whispered around town. But this vehicle bore the sleek polish of business, not crisis. Samantha stepped outside, wiping her hands on her jeans. From the passenger seat stepped a woman in her 60s, silver hair tied neatly, wearing a blazer that had seen too many boardrooms. Samantha froze. "Evelyn?" The woman nodded, closing the car door softly behind her. "Hello, Sam." Evelyn Crawford, former chair of the Ethics Committee, a woman whose silence had been louder than Richard's betrayal. They hadn't spoken since the vote, since the night Samantha had walked away from the company she built. "I thought I'd never see you again," Samantha said, not with hostility, but with the quiet fatigue of someone who had let go of expecting closure. Evelyn gave a small, regretful smile. "Neither did I, but things have changed, and I needed to see what you've made here, with my own eyes." Samantha motioned toward the trail that led to the garden. "Walk with me then." They walked in silence for a time, past the greenhouse, where Carla was pruning the last of the tomatoes, past the workshop where Maurice was teaching Joy how to repair fencing. At every turn, Evelyn saw not chaos or makeshift survival, but structure, hope, something living and stubbornly rooted. "It's beautiful," she said softly. "It's necessary," Samantha replied. "Beauty was never the goal." "No," Evelyn agreed. "But sometimes the things we build out of necessity become beautiful despite us." They reached the bench at the edge of the clearing. Samantha sat, waited. Evelyn took a long breath. "You should know. Richard's no longer on the board. There was an audit." Several investments went unaccounted for. His hands weren't clean. Samantha's jaw tightened. I could have told you that years ago. I know, Evelyn said, looking away. But back then, none of us wanted to see it. You were passionate, uncompromising. He made us believe that was dangerous. You let him bury me, Samantha said. Not angry, just true. We let ourselves be afraid of your fire, Evelyn admitted. But now, everything's unraveling. Investors want answers, and some want you back. Samantha laughed short, humorless. Back to what? To fix a system designed to silence voices like mine the moment they get too loud? Evelyn didn't argue. She simply said, You still hold weight, Sam. The name you walked away from it still echoes. And if you spoke now, if you shared your story, it would matter. Samantha stood. It already matters. Here. Every woman who walks through that gate carries the same wound, the same silence I carried. And I don't need a board seat to make noise anymore. Evelyn rose, dusted off her coat. I won't ask you to return, but would you consider speaking? There's a symposium next month on restorative leadership. They need someone like you. No, Samantha said, then paused. But send me the date. Evelyn nodded, understanding more in that pause than any acceptance could have given her. You've become more than they ever let you be, she said. You've become what they feared. And what was that? Samantha asked. A woman who doesn't need their permission to lead. That night, Samantha pulled out a worn journal from the drawer by her bed. It was the same one she had carried through the first months after leaving the company, half-empty pages filled with questions, anger, sketches of what Second Light might become. She turned to a blank page and began to write. Not for records, not for evidence, but for clarity. They came to see if I had softened. I haven't. I've only sharpened where it counts. The fire didn't burn me down. It made me precise. Every scar is a signature. Every failure, a blueprint. I don't want revenge. I want renewal. And I've already started. The next morning, she gathered the team under the pavilion. Leaves rustled above them, gold and brittle. Samantha looked at them all, Maurice, Carla, Joy, Anna, and then at the new women who had arrived the night before. I want to tell you something, she began. When I started this place, I thought I was building it to get away from something. But now I know I was building it to return to myself, and you've all helped me do that. Each of you has taken pieces of this land and made them sacred. You've made healing look like strength. You've made silence optional. She paused, then added, But now, they want my voice. The same people who tried to strip it from me, and I'm thinking about giving it to them, not for them, but for every woman who hasn't yet found hers. No applause followed, only a solemn hum of acknowledgement. Because everyone there knew what it cost to speak in a room built to drown you out. That night, as the sun melted behind the trees and the world exhaled, Samantha stood at the front porch of the main cabin, the journal in her hands, and a decision in her heart. She would speak, not because she owed them, but because she didn't. And that, she realized, was power the kind they could never touch again. The ballroom at the Emory Center in downtown Chicago gleamed with polished glass and chandeliers that mimicked falling stars, white tablecloths, programs with gilded lettering, and the hum of cautious optimism filled the space. The Restorative Leadership Symposium had drawn CEOs, activists, academics, and skeptics, all of them gathered to witness the future of accountability. Samantha stood behind the curtain, her fingers grazing the worn edge of the leather-bound journal in her bag. She wore a dark navy suit tailored, clean, simple, not armor, but declaration. Maurice had driven her to the airport days before. As she stepped out, he had said only, "Whatever you say it like you're talking to us back at the Ridge. That's the only truth that matters." Carla had tucked a note in her luggage. "They think your power is your fall, but we know it's your rise." And Joy? She had hugged Samantha so tightly before she left, whispering, "Don't just shake the room, redefine it." The MC's voice boomed over the sound system. Our next speaker is a former tech executive, an innovator in trauma-informed leadership, and the founder of Second Light, a community built on accountability, resilience, and the courage to begin again. Please welcome Samantha Graves. As she stepped onto the stage, there were murmurs, familiar ones, the kind that once would have wrapped around her ankles like chains. Now they only reminded her how far she'd walked. She took the mic, didn't fumble, didn't clear her throat, just breathed, then spoke. 3 years ago, I was called emotional, impulsive, and too principled to be useful. They were right about one thing: I was principled, and that made me dangerous. A ripple of laughter, hesitant but real. They told me to stop chasing ghosts, that the system was too big, too complex, but I wasn't chasing ghosts. I was naming them. I was living inside the consequences of choices made by people who never had to clean up what they broke. She let the silence hang. I was the first black woman to lead my division. I was also the first to be removed under the guise of performance review when I uncovered internal corruption. And in those early days, when I walked out with nothing but a laptop and the truth, I didn't know if I would ever speak publicly again. Heads nodded. Not just polite agreement recognition, but silence, she said, her voice firm, is not the same as peace. And sometimes, leaving the table is the only way to build a better house. A woman in the third row lowered her eyes, tears blinking free. So I left. I started Second Light. Not to escape, but to remember what unfiltered leadership looks like. Every woman who came through our gate came with a wound that no boardroom ever acknowledged. And every man who joined came with something to unlearn. Together, we didn't just survive. We practiced a different kind of power. One that listens, one that owns mistakes, one that heals. She opened her journal. Pages fluttered. She didn't need to read. The words had already settled in her. I'm not here to beg for re-entry. I'm not here to be forgiven. I'm here to say this. You can't bury truth under promotions or silence it with payouts. You can only delay it, and delay doesn't erase damage. Only responsibility does. She stepped back from the mic. Applause rose, not thunderous, but layered, earnest. A woman with graying curls stood, then a man in a faded veteran's jacket, then another. It wasn't a standing ovation of spectacle. It was a rising of people who had needed to hear a voice like hers for a long time. After the panel, Evelyn found her backstage. You did what no one else could. You held the mirror up without smashing it. I didn't come to make them comfortable, Samantha said. I came to make them remember. They will, Evelyn said quietly, and so will history. That evening, Samantha took a late flight home. The plane descended over the countryside as dawn painted soft blues across the horizon. Back at Second Light, the cabin slept. The earth, scorched days ago, now shimmered with the early green of regeneration. Maurice was waiting in the truck at the tiny regional airport. When she opened the door and sat down, he looked at her with a familiar grin. So, how'd it go? I said what needed saying, she answered. I didn't flinch. Good, he said, turning the key. Then it was worth it. As the tires rumbled over gravel and the trees welcomed her home, Samantha exhaled. Something in her chest unknotted. Not relief exactly, but release. She had gone back into the lion's den, not to fight, but to plant something new. And in that soil, even in that place, truth had taken root. Back at the lodge, Joy handed her a mug of tea, steam curling like a benediction. Welcome home, she said. Samantha smiled. Feels like I never left. Later, as she walked the trail behind the ridge, journal in hand, she reached the bench where she and Evelyn had once sat. She added a line to her notes. I didn't burn the bridge. I built another way across. Then closed the book. Behind her, the wind picked up, rustling the pines, but ahead quiet, steady, waiting. By late autumn, the trees at Second Light had surrendered their leaves, leaving bare limbs stretching upward like arms in prayer. The air had turned crisp, and smoke from the hearths curled into the sky in thin ribbons. Life moved in quiet rhythms, now wood-stacked, soup simmering, laughter echoing in the early evenings. Samantha sat on the porch of the main cabin, with a blanket draped over her lap and her journal resting on her knees. Across the compound, Maurice and Joy were helping Anna prepare a raised bed for winter greens, their hands busy, their faces serene. From time to time, Carla's voice could be heard from the workshop, firm and full of encouragement, as she guided two new arrivals through their first carpentry session. Samantha sipped her tea, closed her eyes for a moment, and let the sound settle in her chest like music. There was a peace here, but it wasn't the kind that came from escape. It was earned, fought for, watered with tears, built from the ruins of broken trust and old systems. It was the kind of peace that held weight and meaning. A rustle of footsteps stirred the gravel below. Samantha opened her eyes to see a man in a tweed coat standing at the bottom of the steps. He looked uncertain, the way people often did when they first arrived, not sure if they belonged, not sure if they were too late. "Can I help you?" she asked, rising. He removed his cap, revealing salt and pepper hair and kind, tired eyes. "I'm Thomas. My daughter, Clara, she was here." Samantha's brow furrowed. Clara had left 4 months ago, strong and steady, ready to restart her life in Ohio. "She spoke of this place often," Thomas continued. "Said it gave her back to herself. I didn't understand what she meant until I saw her last week. I barely recognized her, not just her face, her spirit. I came to see what did that." Samantha studied him a moment, then smiled softly. "Come on in, we'll make you some lunch. You can meet the place yourself." He followed her up the steps. Inside, the warmth was immediate: wood, wool, soup on the stove. Thomas took a seat at the long communal table, where a vase of dried lavender stood between old mason jars and hand-carved salt shakers. As Samantha prepared 2 bowls of lentil stew, he looked around, absorbing every detail. "She told me about the mornings," he said quietly. "How everyone starts the day together, how no one asks for your resume, just your story." Samantha nodded. "We listen first here. That's what most places forget to do." He accepted the bowl she handed him, then paused. "Do you think places like this can change the world?" She didn't answer right away. Instead, she looked out the window, where Joy had just caught a falling leaf mid-air and was laughing as if the world had just handed her a secret. "I think," Samantha said slowly, "they already are, one life at a time, one truth at a time." That night, she gathered the community under the old oak at the edge of the clearing. The moon hung low, and lanterns flickered around them. It was the last community circle of the season before winter set in a tradition they'd begun in the early days. Everyone sat wrapped in blankets, cradling warm mugs. Samantha stood in the center. "We began this place as a whisper," she said. "A whisper against noise, against injustice, against forgetting who we are when the world tries to define us by our damage. And now, that whisper has grown louder because of you." She looked at each face. "Each of you carried pain here, and each of you turned it into something worthy: connection, skill, laughter, purpose. That's not accidental, that's sacred." A hush fell, reverent. Samantha reached into her coat pocket and held up a small key. "We're adding a new cabin," she said, "because more people are coming, and they deserve what we've found here. Not charity, not correction, just the chance to breathe again." Maurice stepped forward, clapping slowly. One by one, others joined in, not boisterous, but full of something deeper: hope, continuity. Later, Samantha walked the trail to the ridge alone. The stars were out in full, bright and cold above the pines. She sat on the bench Evelyn once occupied, her breath visible in the night air. Pulling out her journal for the last time, she wrote without pause. "I used to believe justice needed a courtroom. I know better now. Sometimes, justice is a meal shared in silence, a fence built with calloused hands, a voice that no longer trembles. Second Light wasn't built to fix the world. It was built so the world couldn't break us." She closed the journal, for good. When she returned to the main cabin, a soft glow spilled from the windows. Laughter came from inside, Maurice telling one of his impossible stories, Joy cackling, Carla chiming in with her dry wit. As she reached the door, someone inside yelled, "Hey, Sam, you coming in, or you planning to freeze out there with your thoughts?" She smiled, pushed open the door, and stepped inside into warmth, into belonging, into a light that never flickered again. The story of Second Light reminds us that healing doesn't come from erasing the past, but from facing it with courage and community. In a world where power often silences truth, it is the quiet spaces of honesty, dignity, and connection that restore us. Justice isn't always loud or public. It can be found in rebuilding trust, listening deeply, and daring to believe that broken people are still whole enough to lead, to love, and to begin again.